Matt Kotzen. I'm the chair of the philosophy department, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our fall philosophy in 15 minutes event. The philosophy in 15 minutes event that we've held, it existed for about 5 years, and the goal is to give us an opportunity to reach out to the Carolina community and beyond to tell you a little bit about what we do in the philosophy department and in the Parr Center for Ethics and in the philosophy, politics, and economics program. So you might know a little bit about the philosophy department. We're just in Caldwell Hall, just a few doors down. The philosophy, politics, and economics program is an interdisciplinary program run by Professor Jeff Sara right up there in the wings. And they sponsor a tremendous variety of different programming. They sponsor an interdisciplinary minor, which you'll hear more about today. The Parr Center for Ethics is the public face of the university's commitment to ethics. It's run by Professor Sara. And there's, again, a number of different programs and opportunities that exist within the Parr Center. We're both housed within the philosophy department, so it's one big philosophy family. But our goal for today is just to tell you a little bit about what we do, give you an opportunity to get to know some of us in the philosophy department, to hear about some of the programs and courses and other opportunities that exist within the department and the PP program and the Parr Center for Ethics, and to see a little bit about what we do. So philosophy in 15 minutes gets its name from the 15-minute philosophical presentations, which you'll see shortly. We have 3 of them planned for you today. And we'll also be getting some contributions from representatives of the Parr Center for Ethics and the PP program to tell you about some programs that you might be interested to learn more about. Afterwards, fortunately, the weather has really cooperated. It's a beautiful day, so we'll be just outside on the patio afterwards. There's some food and snacks that will be available for everyone. And those of us who are presenting will also be available to chat with you, get to know you a little bit better. If you have any questions about the department or the PPE program or the Center for Ethics or about anything that you hear today, including the philosophical presentations, it'll be a nice opportunity for us to chat for a bit and enjoy the wonderful weather. So thanks again for being here. It's my pleasure first to introduce our first speaker today, Daniel Muñoz. Daniel Muñoz just joined the department as an assistant professor and a core faculty member in the PPE program. Daniel works on a wide variety of different topics, including ethics and epistemology and lots of other stuff. And Daniel will be our first speaker, so please join me in welcoming Daniel Muñoz.
Thank you so much. Matt, would you mind giving me a 5-minute warning?
You bet.
Okay, great. So nice to see you all. Nice to see some of my students here. Nice to see some familiar and unfamiliar faces. So when I was a kid, I was taught if you want to use somebody's stuff, you're supposed to ask permission. That's what morality wants you to do. But we don't always do what morality wants us to do. Let me give you a real example where I didn't do this. So on the way here, I noticed that right outside, I need some sunglasses. So I found a pair, actually, that's lying on my table, I don't know why, belonging to someone in the UNC Philosophy department. And I'm not saying it was Matt, but I took the glasses and I wore them. I didn't ask permission. It doesn't stop there. On the way here, I got a little bit thirsty. I wanted a bottle of water. And so I reached into my pocket for a wallet, and I'm not saying it was Matt's, but it belonged to somebody in the UNC Philosophy department. Took a little cash out of it, bought myself a little bottle of water. So far, so good. But we all get bored. So I actually got a little bit bored on the way here. So I took out a phone belonging to a member of the UNC Philosophy. I don't know why you keep thinking it's Matt. And I unlocked the phone, and I scrolled through some emails, and I sent out some replies to amuse myself. Throughout all of this, I didn't ask permission, certainly not from Matt. But it's not so obvious I did anything morally wrong. Big review. I'm a member of the UNC Philosophy department. I used my glasses, I used my cash, I opened my phone. That's kind of interesting. There's so many things that we can do to ourselves all the time, every day. No problem, no permission, no consent. That would be, let's say, problematic to start doing out of the blue to everyone else. Now, there's 2 kinds of solutions to this ethical puzzle. Why is it? that we're so much more restricted when it comes to other people and their things in their bodies than ourselves and our own things, our own bodies. One reason why we might have this personal freedom is that we don't owe anything to ourselves. When it comes to rights, when it comes to obligations, that's a matter of society. That's not a matter of you solo. What you do between you and yourself is not morality business. Now, I myself am not very drawn to that. I mean, for one thing, what's so special about me? I seem like a person like anybody else. And can't there be some explanation, other than it's fundamental, why I don't violate any rights when I check my email? Whereas I do violate rights when I have Matt's emails? Like, that sounds like the sort of thing that there should be an answer to. So, there's another kind of solution to the puzzle that I am open to exploring. And that's the idea that although we do have obligations to ourselves, just as we have to anybody else, there's something special but explicable about the relation we have to ourselves that makes it clear why we don't constantly violate our own rights. In particular, the idea goes, what you do to yourself, you do to a willing party. When you decide to use your own cash, when I decide to check my own emails, there's no unwilling victim. It's not a hack. But that's not because of the number of people involved, it's because there are 0 unwilling victims. Okay, now, first a little bit of clarification before I go over the problems for this week. I'm not saying that anything you can do to someone else you can do to yourself, that every way of wronging another person, of violating their rights, of disappointing them or letting them down or whatever, there's the same analog for yourself. There's just some things you can do that are not possible when it comes to acting towards yourself, that are all too real when it comes to acting towards others. So I'm going to give a cool example. So Wittgenstein means stealing. So when the left hand takes money from the right hand, it's not really a theft. Other examples might include giving information. So I can inform you of something, but I can't really inform myself of something. At least if that means I tell myself something that I know that I don't know yet. Good luck with that. But what are some other examples? Can you think of things that you can do to other people that would be wrong that you cannot do to yourself? Bet you didn't think you were going to get cold called, did you? Luke Bovens. What's something you can do to another person that you can't do to yourself?
Offend them.
Ooh, offend them. Interesting. It's easy to offend somebody else. You say something that you think is okay that they don't think is okay. But it's harder if you're trying to offend yourself. You say something that you think is okay, but you also don't think is okay. Yeah, that doesn't really make sense. Let me give another example. Doing something against somebody's will. Overpowering, dominating, controlling, coercing, deceiving, making a false promise. There's just a ton of stuff that's only a concern in the two-person case, because for one person to do it to themselves, they would have to have incompatible mental states or something like that. They have to both own and not own the money. They have to both be offended and not find it offensive. So I call this the asymmetry of possibilities. There's some stuff you can do to wrong others you can't do to yourself. Forget about that. That's not the issue. That's not what philosophers have been debating. The really interesting asymmetry when it comes to wronging yourself or owing things to yourself versus another person is this. When you can do something to someone else just as well as you can do it to yourself, is it just as wrong, other things being equal, to do it to yourself? Or is there some fundamental difference made by the fact that it's you? That is called the self-other asymmetry by philosophers. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's helpful. So some of my work is exploring the idea of the self-other symmetry. You can't always wrong other people in the same ways you wrong yourself and vice versa, but other things equal, the same principles are involved. Wronging yourself is like wronging a consenting party. That's the idea. So let's take the example of checking emails again. Something morally has gone wrong if I check Matt's emails without asking permission, right? Nothing has gone wrong when I check my own email. But look, is there anything wrong with checking Matt's email if he says, would you mind looking for something for me? I'm going to expecting something, I can't be bothered now, here's the password, go look at it. Maybe that's a little invasive, but it's certainly a lot better than hacking. Or to take another example, if you use somebody's bike with their consent, that's just as morally innocent as riding your own bike. So when it comes to consenting actions, they seem a lot like actions done to yourself. But what about the pathological cases? What about the cases where consent goes wrong? One of the sad facts we learned from bioethics in the 20th century is that consent can be deeply flawed, it can be misinformed. Right? When a doctor doesn't tell a patient the risks. It can be coerced, when a patient doesn't really have the chance to say no. And it can also be incompetent. Perhaps the patient isn't of the right age or isn't in the right mindset to make the decision. If morality were self-other symmetric, in the sense that duties to others were like duties to selves, you would expect that whenever you are misinformed about yourself, whenever you are, I don't know how this works, coercing yourself, or whenever you are incompetently making decisions about yourself, you would wrong yourself. You'd be acting without your own valid consent. Now, that seems like a problem. A lot of philosophers, like Slow, have thought there's something very absurd about the idea of saying that you wrong yourself because you're incompetent. He says, consider the case of somebody irrationally harming an irrationally consenting other. So two people are a bit out of their minds one night, and one whacks the other across the head. He says, that's quite wrong. Now consider the case where one person's a bit out of their mind one day, and they do something similarly harmful, but only to themselves. Philosophers have thought, well, these are very different cases. Harming yourself, whether it's this made-up case of incompetent night, or the case of medically assisted suicide versus euthanasia, a serious case, philosophers have thought there's something fundamentally different about harming others. But I'm not so sure. Let's think about this self-other symmetrically. Oh, too easy. So, why would you think that it's any worse to harm the other person than harm yourself? Well, now let's think about this. One reason why we might think that it's okay, or rather not so problematic, to be in a state of mind and to do something harmful, is that the fact that you're in that state of mind is like an excuse. For example, if you've been drugged or something, or if you're delirious from a heat stroke you've been hiking all day, we don't think now is the time to hold you morally responsible for every choice that you do. That's a situation where we pin it on the heat stroke, we don't pin it on you. But look, that's just as true in the two-person case. For the consenter, who's irrational, and for the person who acts on that consent, who's irrational. There is something problematic about incompetent action on incompetent consent, but it seems to me pretty similar. The problem is that the consent is undermined, but it's not a straightforward, well, it's just wrong, because so is the responsibility of the actor. So incompetence, I'm not yet convinced that this is self-other asymmetry. It seems to me like it works pretty similar. Now let me take one other example. Matt, again, I'm going to use you, apologies, without your consent. So, I love drinking coffee, I drink it all the time. So I pour coffee into my mouth. Now, suppose I pour coffee into Matt's mouth without asking permission. Some kind of moral failure has happened here, right? If I'm ever going to be pouring coffee into Matt's mouth, it's going to be some very special situation. Like Matt is immobile and undercaffeinated. And he's asking me, Daniel, please, I gotta stay awake, I can't move my arms, give me some coffee. Then and only then does it seem morally reasonable for me to start pouring coffee into the chair of the philosophy department's mouth, the guy who hired me. So, and yet, none of that rigmarole seems necessary when I drink coffee solo. Right? I was at a cafe earlier today with my friend Parr. If I had been doing this little ritual, like writing out a consent form, signing it, or asking myself out loud, Daniel, would you like to get yourself some coffee? Yes, I would. She probably would have left the cafe. That is not the kind of behavior that we expect people to do with themselves. And we don't think it's at all necessary for a nice, healthy coffee self-relation. So, what's going on? Okay, one, did you see the problem? The problem is that it seems like it's fine, but we don't seem to give ourselves consent. But if duties to self work like duties to others, you would expect that in the solo case, you do need to give yourself consent. Okay. Now, one possibility is that we do actually literally consent to anything we do to ourselves. On one very influential view of consent, consenting to something is basically wanting. Whether or not you voice your desire, you consent to the stuff that you want, or that you intend, or that you think internally, gimme, gimme, gimme. Or at least, I don't mind if you do gimme. If that's the right view of consent, if consent is a mental state like a desire, yeah, I actually did literally consent to drinking a coffee. I just didn't have to make a big ritual of it. No big deal. Self-other symmetry preserved. However, probably the more popular view of consent, my own favorite view of consent, says that consent is not an internal mental state. Whatever someone wants in their head, they don't consent unless they say it, generally speaking. Usually consent requires a certain amount of behavior. It can be explicit. I do hereby consent to you entering my premises and fixing my kitchen on this day. Or, you can do this surgery. It can also be implicit. I say, nod, I say, go ahead, I say, you do you, whatever it might be. But I don't do anything, whether explicit or implicit, before I drink the coffee. Again, when I'm with Sara at the cafe, I don't say, all right, buddy, you do you, and then drink a cappuccino. So, if consent requires behavior, you don't give yourself consent. That's a serious threat to the idea that morality of yourself is like morality with others. So, here's the final idea. Perhaps, if that's right, then it was a bit of a mistake to think that the essence of how we negotiate our obligations is this idea of consent. Maybe there are other ways. I mean, for example, if I tell Luke, well, okay, let's be real. If Luke tells me to do something, he's the senior philosopher here. If Luke tells me, I'll go clean this off of my desk, he hasn't consented to doing it. I mean, he told me to, but he is willing. Similarly, if two people are kind of cooperating in perfect harmony, I wouldn't say that anyone's giving or asking for permission, but everybody's willing. Perhaps the real analogy between how we treat ourselves and how we treat other people is that what you do to yourself is like what you do to a cooperating party. Whether or not that cooperation is expressed with consent forms or may I, it's just a matter of people together deciding what they want to do. The trick is, when you're deciding what to do with yourself, what kind of life you want to live, what kind of surgeries you want to sign up for, what kind of career you want to go for. The only people involved are you, yourself, and you. So, thank you so much.
My glasses.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for your glasses.
Sure. I assure you I'm both mobile and adequately caffeinated. All right. So next presentation is going to be about the exciting new opportunity as of last year in the Parr Center for Ethics. We've created an undergraduate fellowship in the Parr Center for Ethics that give undergraduate students across campus, whether they're philosophy majors or minors or PP minors or not, an opportunity to get involved with the Parr Center, get to know the Parr Center staff and their programming, and to participate in a variety of the activities that the Parr Center engages with every day. So to talk to you a little bit about the Parr Center Fellowship, we have two undergraduate fellows, Jennifer Judd and Hayden.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer. I'm a junior currently, a biology major and philosophy minor. And I am, sorry, forgot to do that. And I am on the executive board in the Parr Center working with the National High School Ethics Board this year.
And I'm Hayden, also a junior. I am a philosophy and political science double major, and I am a
Parr Center is basically the public face of UNC's commitment to ethics. It serves as a home for discussion of ethical questions. And so we are both involved in the undergraduate portion of the Parr Center, which is called the Parr Heal Programming, a little pun we came up with this year. And there are 3 different programs we offer: the Recruits, the Fellows, and the Scholars programs. And today we want to talk to you guys a little bit about the Recruits program, which is our newest program this year.
So the Ethics Recruits program helps students develop moral reasoning skills throughout the year and encourages students to challenge themselves through ethical dialogue. Some of the opportunities for recruits this year are listening to and interacting with emphasis and other speakers that we host, collaborating with other students from the recruits and fellows on programming and helping out with some of our events throughout the year.
And then some of the other things that you get to do as a recruit is you're invited to all of our Parr Heal social events. And this is also a way that you can start working towards the Parr Heal Scholar designation. The program is really just a great way to sort of dip your toes in to be part of your programming in our community, and can be a really great jumping off point for getting more involved in the fellowship with the fellows program.
Right now, we're currently looking for our inaugural cohorts. The application is open right now on our website, which I think you can find by scanning that. And if not, it is at go.unc.edu/ethicsrecruits.
So I think this has already been mentioned, but anyone from any major can apply. And you don't have to have any experience, any previous experience in philosophy or in ethics. You really just need to be interested in having some really cool ethical discussions with a bunch of really interesting people. And our community is very interdisciplinary and diverse, and we would love to have you come and join us.
Thank you.
Jennifer and Hayden. So our next presentation, 15-minute presentation, is going to be by Sara Copic. Sara is one of our graduate students. She's in the advanced stages of the program. It's kind of like the advanced stages of the disease. Advanced stages of the program where she's actively working on her dissertation. Among the areas that she works in are philosophy of language and metaphysics, and she's going to be presenting on those topics today. So please join me in welcoming Sara Copic.
Meaningful thoughts, and we like to call these meaningful thoughts propositions. But what kind of thing is a proposition? Certainly doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that this podium is. So that's a little bit puzzling. Another question. Names seem to successfully be able to pick out or to refer to individuals. But how is it that they do that? What is the mechanism by which a name gets to pick out Matt Kotzen, say? Think about fictional cases. Are sentences like Santa wears a red suit true? Do fictional names like Santa Claus refer to anything at all? Are there any sentences that are guaranteed to be true just by virtue of the expressions, the linguistic expressions involved in those sentences? So something like all bachelors are male is a classic example. That seems to be something you could know just by virtue of understanding the terms in that expression. But not all sentences are like that. To know that this podium is brown, you've got to look at this thing. Final one on our list here. Some of our utterances are about possibilities instead of actual facts. So what makes statements about possibilities true? Now, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a small sampling. But you might notice that many of these questions have to do with meaning and truth. Today's topic, though, doesn't have to do with truth, per se. Instead, we're going to be looking at what makes a claim successful even if it's false. Ready? Okay. So consider the following perfectly ordinary claims. I hand you an apple. This apple is red. There are 6 chairs at this table. I see no reason to forgive him. After all, he did it of his own free will. Torturing an innocent person is wrong, plain and simple. So these seem like perfectly ordinary kinds of statements, and in the right context, they seem intuitively true. But there are a lot of philosophical theories on which perfectly ordinary, unsuspecting claims like this are false. So here's a quick table that gives a little sampling of these kinds of views. On the left, you'll see our ordinary claim, seems perfectly reasonable, and on the right, what I call radical philosophical theory. So take the idea that there are no color properties. Nothing's red, so it's not the case that this apple is red. Call that color illuminativism. I'll be saying that term a lot throughout this presentation because we're going to use that as our central case, so bear with me. Or consider claims about there being 6 chairs at the table. There's a view on which there are really no composite objects whatsoever. So there are no chairs at all. He did it of his own free will. There's a view called hard determinism, on which no one is responsible for any of their actions because there is no such thing as free will. And then the claim about torture, we've got a view, moral error theory, on which there are no moral properties, and nothing is wrong at all. Neither is anything morally required. So it seems like that claim might be false, if these theories on the right-hand side are true. So let's just suppose, for the sake of this presentation, that color illuminativism is true. There are no color properties, and nothing makes our color claims true. And then notice that we can still have color experiences, things still can look red to us, and we've still got this complicated scientific story that I'm sure you all can teach me about in much more detail later on, about the light and reflection and refraction and the cones in our eyes and how our brains process these color experiences. So all of that still gets to be the case, but there are no colors. All right, so notice first, we haven't done something yet. We haven't gone over any arguments for these kinds of radical views. Not the topic of today's talk, but if you want to chat more about that later, I'd be happy to over some food. All right, second point. We do often think philosophical theories should preserve our common sense claims to some extent. Maybe not all of the time, but it certainly seems like a big theoretical cost for a theory to entail that these ordinary beliefs and the ordinary statements that we make are systematically false. So I want to invite you to think about the following kind of case. Maybe, even if color eliminativism is true, our ordinary color claims are still successful in some kind of way. So imagine I hand you a red delicious apple. That's trademarked, I'll have you know. And then when you say this apple is red, okay, something about that claim, even on our assumption, it's false, something about that seems better off than if you were to say this apple is purple. And maybe it even seems better off than this apple has no color. So we've got here our little table. We've got this ordinary claim the apple is red. That seems appropriate in a sense, even though it's not true. Your claim that the apple is purple, not true, but also not appropriate. And then this apple has no color, that seems true, but it's not appropriate in the same way as the first claim. All right, so here's the challenge. what is it that makes our ordinary claims appropriate or successful, even if they're made false by a radical philosophical theory? So if someone who endorses a radical philosophical theory can answer that challenge, then maybe the cost of that theory isn't so bad after all. Sure, we've given up on truth, but maybe we have something else that's good enough. So that's the challenge. And we're gonna fly through some candidate answers to this question today. So we're gonna consider the following 4 options. Consider that causal story that I glossed over earlier. We understand very roughly how it is that you get to see that apple that I handed you as red. Now, I won't bore you with the details, we've only got 15 minutes. But you see the apple as red because of this complicated causal story. Do we really need to say anything more to answer this challenge? I think yes. You know, a causal explanation of something isn't actually going to tell you what's successful about that thing. So compare, I'm worried about failing the exam. That caused me to cheat on the exam. Okay, that doesn't make cheating good, and that certainly doesn't justify it. So we need to go further than that. So you might think, maybe we have good evidence for our ordinary claims. You've got good evidence that this apple is red. Here's our formal statement, handy-dandy of this view. An ordinary claim, such as this apple is red, is appropriate if and only if our total evidence supports it. So here's a case for this view. We've got a traveler. She's wandering through the desert, and she has it on good authority that she's headed in the direction of an oasis. She crossed paths with some locals who were just there, and they told her if she keeps heading west, she'll eventually get there. So she's wandering west. She sees what she takes to be an oasis in the distance, and she thinks to herself, there's an oasis ahead of me. But it's a mirage. She arrives at that spot and realizes her mistake and takes back her claim. If the evidence view is right, then our situation with respect to our ordinary claims is just as precarious as the traveler's. But that doesn't seem quite right. The traveler can just check whether or not her claim is true. Sure, it takes a little bit of effort. She's got to wander a long distance. She's got to inspect whether there's any water there, but she'll get to the answer eventually. It seems like no matter how carefully you check whether the apple is red and you consult with the apple experts, you know, you're not gonna get any closer to figuring it out. On our assumption that color eliminativism is true. So, what about another try? Consider again that claim Santa wears a red suit. We're all really familiar with our favorite fictions. And so, in these kinds of cases when we're telling stories, we seem to make claims that don't aim at literal truth, right? When you say that Hermione's the smartest girl at Hogwarts, you know, you're not making the same kind of claim as you would be about maybe your classmate. So a fictionalist response to our challenge from speaker success might go something like this. You know, ordinarily, our claims like this apple is red are literally false, but they're true within some kind of useful fiction. So that's the kind of success, rather than having good evidence. We're uttering the claim in a different kind of spirit than we thought we were. And then here's some questions for the fictionalist. You know, that idea of fictionalism isn't totally foreign to us, but when we say that Santa wears a red suit, we know we're engaging in a pretense. We know it's make-believe. Sorry, spoilers. But when we say that the apple is red, we don't know that we're doing that. It seems to us that we're making a literal claim. that there is a difference between the attitude that you can take toward a statement. Or I'm sorry, you need to be able to engage in a pretense without knowing that you're doing it. So one, we might ask, how plausible is that claim? And then second, we might wonder, does this really help with our challenge? Because we wanted to know what's good about our ordinary claims, even if they turn out to be false. But has the fictionalist just replaced one error for another? Seems like if you don't have access to the idea of what kind of activity you're engaging in, that's a bit of a problem for the fictionalist. All right, a third possible answer. There's a rich tradition in philosophy of language which tries to explain how it is that we can literally say one thing but successfully communicate a different thought. So consider some of these examples. Consider this claim. The student has impeccable handwriting and is extremely punctual, but it's written in the context of a recommendation letter for graduate school. Yikes. All right, so I ask you, did you go to the party? And you say, I had class. You didn't literally tell me that you didn't go to the party, but I know what you meant. I know what you meant to say is you didn't go. Third example, you're hungry, you check your fridge, and there's no food in there. You say this fridge is completely empty, but there's a bottle of water in it and some specks of dirt. So it seems like you've said something that's literally false, but if you had said that to another person, you might have communicated the right kind of thought. It's completely empty of food, something like that. So lots of examples like this. You'll run into lots more if you ever take philosophy of language, but let's return to how this can help us with our challenge. So pragmatic view says our ordinary claims, back to this apple is red, they get to be appropriate if and only if they communicate something useful, but they don't literally make a useful claim, perhaps. So this apple is red gets to be false, but I still communicate something that's useful to you as the hearer. Here are a few questions for this kind of view. And this is just meant to give you a taste of how one might proceed if you wanted to continue on this route. So, first, what exactly is communicated? So I've said something false, but what is the information that I've told you? Going back to these examples, I say one thing literally, but I have communicated some other information to you. What is that information in this case? What's the mechanism by which I communicate that information? And then whatever mechanism is proposed, is it going to get the cases right? So we're going to have to see another time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Sara. Our next and final 15-minute presentation for today is going to be by Professor Michael Vazquez. Professor Vazquez is a teaching assistant professor in the philosophy department and is also the director of our outreach program. We'd be delighted to talk to you about the outreach program after this event, but our outreach program is a pretty big and robust program that involves reaching out to lots of members of our broader community, including doing philosophical events with children in schools and seniors in senior communities and incarcerated individuals and a wide variety of other people who we think can benefit from the pleasures and joys of philosophical reasoning and thinking. So we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards if you want to, but in the meantime, Professor Vazquez will be talking to us today about stoicism. So join me in welcoming Michael Vazquez.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. So, as Matt mentioned, I'm going to talk to you today about Stoicism. Perhaps a pessimistic note here. This is a sad view that I think the Stoics had, but I think it's of interest and worth dwelling on. So you've probably heard of the Stoics. As of late, they've kind of made their way onto the front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Silicon Valley is taking up Stoic practices of resilience, focus on the things that are in your control, eliminate the passions that get in the way of happiness, anger, and grief. These are kind of useful Stoic therapies that are becoming increasingly popular. And I think probably the coolest thing about that, and I'm all for it, let's make the Stoics popular, is that it's rooted in kind of a systematic philosophical theory. The Stoics were first and foremost philosophers. So all the useful stuff is based in really rigorous kind of thinking. So here's how one person puts it in the ancient world, who's sort of describing the Stoic system. Can you imagine any other system with the removal of a single letter, like an interlocking piece would cause the whole edifice to come tumbling down? Not, and this is the important addition, that there is anything here which could possibly be altered. So the Stoics were rigorous, systematic philosophers. Unfortunately, to us today, this is a lot of what Stoicism looks like. All we have are fragments and testimony, kind of indirect quotations, usually from people who have a bone to pick with the Stoics, people who are trying to argue that they're wrong. And so what was probably one of the most beautiful systems of philosophy in the history of ideas is a lot like these ruins. But the thing I want to highlight here is that actually the ruins are kind of the most exciting element of studying the history of philosophy, and especially Stoicism. Because you have to piece together the puzzle. And what tools do you bring when it comes to that kind of reconstructive project, trying to figure out what the Stoics thought? Well, despite all our differences, and yes, the ancient and Greek and Roman world was very different from ours, they believed in kind of reason and logic as the way to do philosophy. And so some of the most exciting philosophical work can happen in this space in the history of ideas. So I want to tell you about one corner of that puzzle that I've been thinking about lately. In order to tell you about it, I'm going to give you the 2-minute primer on Stoicism. Here's your crash course, if you haven't had one already. First, and probably most importantly, because this is the part that people maybe try to downplay when they're trying to update Stoicism today, the Stoics believed in a providential view of the world. The world as we know it is structured purposively. It is created by a force of reason that they call by lots of different names, and it sounds a little bit wonky. Zeus, fate, nature. These are all names for the same reality that kind of pervades all aspects of life. You can think of history for the Stoics as the unfolding of a divine plan. So they believed in providence. It's a good, rational plan. Everything that happens is in accord with that plan. Okay, so connected to that, thinking a little bit more about kind of their ethics and ethical theory, the Stoics had a really peculiar view about what's good and valuable in life. So conventionally, we like to think things like health, wealth, friends, bodily integrity. These are good things. Not for the Stoics. The only good thing is virtue. The only bad thing is vice. Everything else is indifferent. That's a tough pill to swallow, but that's Stoic thinking. Closely related, of course, is the notion of happiness. And if you think of happiness as sort of getting good things, it's no surprise that the Stoics thought all you need to be happy is virtue. Virtue is sufficient for happiness. And they would get into debates about this in the ancient world, and they doubled down. They would say things like, look, the sage, that is the person who has virtue, is happy even in the moment he's being tortured. That's how secure his happiness is. Virtue is sufficient for happiness. So to put this all together, I just want to bring it to life a little bit. This is a passage from an ancient Stoic. He's talking about Socrates. You've probably heard of Socrates. His Athenian peers put him to death for supposedly corrupting the youth. And he's sitting in prison. He has opportunities to escape, and he doesn't. He actually just drinks the hemlock and is the first kind of martyr in the history of philosophy. And what does Epictetus say about him? Well, he embodies all the ideals of a good Stoic. you can think of indifferent things, which is everything but virtue and vice, as kind of the raw material on which you can kind of exercise your virtue. Everything that happens in the world is an occasion to display your virtue and resilience, the Stoics thought. What did that look like in Socrates' case? Well, he was dealing with imprisonment, exile, drinking hemlock, losing his family. And what did he do? In good form, he treated life like a game, an attitude of detachment and indifference. And he played the game well. And that's what virtue is all about. Earnestly playing the game, whatever Zeus has in store for you. Okay, so now we're ready for the kind of central view that I want to think about. The Stoics were very adamant. There's only two kinds of people in the world. Everyone in this room would fit into one of two boxes. You're either a sage or a fool. Sages are virtuous and they're happy. Fools are miserable and wretched, and they can't help but perpetuate their own misery. This is well known about the Stoics. They were pessimistic about our prospects of perfection and virtue. A couple things to highlight about this view. One, there are no degrees of goodness or virtue in the Stoic view. You can't make an A+ effort and get very close to sagehood and be happy. So they make the following comparison. Think of it this way. Imagine there's two people underwater, and you've got one person who's not even trying. They just sort of resign themselves and sink to the bottom of the seafloor. You have somebody else who's striving really, really hard. They want to get to the top. They want to be able to breathe. But they don't quite get there, at the cusp. According to the Stoics, they're both equally fools, they're both equally vicious, and they're both equally wretched. That's the Stoic view, a very strict binary. Second thing to keep in mind about sages, it would actually be hard to know. If there were a sage in this room, according to the Stoics, it would be very hard for us to know. Why? Because what's characteristic of virtue and of sagehood is not that you start doing particular kinds of things that nobody ordinarily would. No, a good Stoic actually lives a very conventional looking life. They have a family, they run for office, they have a career, and so on. What's distinctive about them is that their disposition to do the right thing is stable. And kind of put it in philosopher language, it's counterfactually robust. What do I mean? The sage does the right thing in some circumstances, let's say he keeps his promise, alter the circumstances a little bit, raise the temptations to break the promise, raise the pressures to feel emotions like anger and grief, and the sage still does the right thing. No matter how far out you travel into these counterfactual scenarios and keep altering the circumstances, the sage does the right thing. So the sage does the right thing for the right reasons from a disposition that is stable and unshakable. Last element of the view, sages are very rare. The Stoics would say things like this, and this is one of the more generous things they said. The sage is as rare as the phoenix. And the phoenix is a mythical bird born maybe every 500 years or so. So we have really good reason to think, and the Stoics basically said as much, that if you took the set of sages, past, present, and future, it may very well be empty. And that's fairly well known, that's fairly widely received. The kind of narrower question I want to focus on is sagehood impossible for some people? In principle, out of reach. Not just really, really hard, not just really, really unlikely, but in principle, out of reach. And yes, I think so. I think the Stoics thought so. So the label I give these people is hopeless fools. That's what I call them. So, what's a hopeless fool? It's someone for whom happiness and virtue are in principle out of reach. Why think there are such people before I tell you a little bit more about what it means to be hopeless? Here's one argument, one motivation for thinking this. Remember, the Stoics believe in providence. And one of the convenient things about believing in providence is you can explain evils pretty easily. So there's famine, there's poverty. The Stoics say, well, that's all part of the good and rational plan. Yeah, it kind of sucks in some sense, but it's part of the plan. This is their theodicy or explanation of evil. What's not well appreciated a lot of the times, I think, is part of that story about evil in the world is the only true evil. Because remember, poverty, famine, for the Stoics, those aren't actually bad, those are indifferent. You can virtuously respond in the face of adversity like that, according to them. But vice, the only true evil, that's also part of the plan. Incurable dispositions to foolishness and vice are part of the good and rational plan. Some of you, perhaps, have been cast in that role, if you think of it as a kind of cosmic drama that's unfolding. Some of you, the script you've been given is to be a hopeless fool. Okay, so let's be a little bit more precise about what hopelessness is. It's not a psychological state. I'm not thinking that if you're hopeless, you're despairing actively. It's from the point of view of fate or Zeus or reason, an objective condition that you're in, namely a condition of being unable to achieve virtue. I don't think we can know who's hopeless, and I'll tell you about that's important in a moment. Okay, so then here are two fruitful ways to unpack this. Okay, we're trying to figure out what's the threshold that separates a hopeless fool from an ordinary garden variety non-hopeless fool. Here's one way to think about it, in a kind of modal terms, as philosophers put it. Remember the sage? I told you what's distinctive about the sage is they do the right thing for the right reasons from a disposition that's so stable that even if you change the scenario, counterfactually, they'll never give in to temptation, they'll never do the wrong thing. Hopeless fool is just the inverse case. No matter how easy we make the game for the hopeless fool, they can't help but do the wrong thing. They can't help but perpetuate their own misery. No matter how far out you go into the possible worlds and altering the circumstances, they never get it right. Okay, here's a more intuitive way to think about it in terms of probability. Imagine you're playing the Powerball. Your chances of winning the Powerball lottery are vanishingly small. Your chances of making a difference if you vote in our elections are vanishingly small, but nonetheless there's a prospect, there's a chance. That's what it's like to be a normal fool, is to have vanishingly small chances of being happy. To be a hopeless fool is to never get a ticket in the first place. You have no prospect whatsoever. So this is a kind of stark division I think the Stoics made. It really severs the connection. There just are some people, how many and who is an open question, who are hopeless, for whom virtue is simply out of reach. Well, who cares? Why think about this so hard? Well, one, here's the not sad part of the talk. We can't know who's hopeless. As I say, it's only maybe Zeus who knows who's genuinely hopeless. Those facts about our kind of inner moral life are not accessible even to ourselves. We don't know whether we ourselves are hopeless, let alone other people. That makes it rational, I think, to hope or to act as if, to sort of pretend we're not hopeless, in the hopes that we're not. So there's some consolation in this, and this is exactly what the Stoics did. You look at their writings, you look at the way they behaved, they never pretended to discriminate. Be like, you're hopeless, lost cause. No. They told everybody, be virtuous, try your best. Try to get out from underwater. They made no pretensions to discriminate, hopeless from non-hopeless. Okay, that's the upshot number one. Second upshot. This is a kind of important philosophical shift. If it's true that some people are hopeless, in what kind of justifies the rationality of acting certain ways? So, in the ancient ethical tradition, happiness is the central concept. What justifies various moral and ethical requirements and reasons for actions that you have? Happiness, the prospect of happiness, either in the future, if you're doing practice enough and cultivate virtue, or right now, if you're a sage. The hopeless fool is defined precisely as someone for whom happiness is in principle out of reach. So why do they have to do the kinds of things the Stoics say that everybody has to do? Things they call appropriate actions or duties. Keeping your promise, respecting your parents, performing the correct ritual sacrifice. Those are things they thought everybody had to do, sage or fool. Then what explains why they had to do it? It can't be the prospect of happiness for the hopeless fool. It's simply because Zeus, right reason, fate said so. And so here's the final note I want to end on. If that story is right, then when we're looking at the history of ethics, the Stoics really are transitional figures. There's a way of doing ethics and moral philosophy centered on happiness. You see this in Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. You see it in the Epicureans, all these various ancient philosophical figures had a view about the human good, human happiness. The Stoics thought there are agents for whom the good life is in principle out of reach. They are transitional figures. They're the first moment, I think, in the history of Western ethics where moral requirements, ethical requirements are rooted not in the prospect of a good human life, but in something else altogether different. This is an intuition many people have had about the Stoics, as this quote from Henry Sidgwick brings out, but it's only ever been an intuition. So if it's true, this is a really kind of concrete way of cashing it out. Thanks for listening.
Michael. So our next presenter is going to tell us a little bit more about the PPE program. I told you a bit about the PPE program at the beginning. PPE stands for Philosophy, Politics, and Economics. It's a program that sponsors both minor and a wide variety of other events and talks and conferences and so forth. And the idea behind the minor is that it isn't just three random fields that are just kind of jammed together, philosophy, Portuguese, and exercise and sports science or something. It's rather three fields that each bring a distinct set of analytical tools together that are essential to the understanding of certain social and political problems. And while each one of those fields has important tools to contribute, each one of those fields necessarily leaves out a certain kind of perspective that we can only get a complete understanding of by putting those fields together. So it's a minor that features both a gateway course where you learn some of these tools that are common to each one of those three fields. Then you go take a course in each one of the three departments from an approved list of PPE courses. And at the end of that, you come together for a capstone experience where you can apply some of the tools that you've learned along the way to some central problems in those three fields. As I said, Professor Sammercourt directs the program, and he'd be delighted to talk to you a lot more about it after the event when we adjourn outside. But right now, we're going to get a little bit more from an undergraduate perspective from one of our minors, Olivia Dagenhart.
You did a great job introducing basically everything I kind of covered. Hi everyone, my name is Olivia Dagenhart. I'm a junior here at UNC, majoring in management and society and minoring in stats and analytics and PPE. Thanks to Fabian Wynn, who was my gateway professor, and Judd who actually taught the philosophy course that I took as my introduction and kind of the reason why I decided to do PPE. I've been given the opportunity to speak about my experience and kind of explain a little bit more about what it can offer other students at the university. So while gathering my thoughts about what to say today, I read over an article about the PPE minor that was published, I think, in 2018. And the title of it was Where Disciplines Connect, Leaders Emerge. So let me explain why. The PPE minor provides students with an enriching opportunity to study the intersection between social, economic, political, and moral problems, and to really think of real-world solutions alongside their fellow classmates. My most recent experience in the PPE minor was taking the gateway course, one that is very intellectually challenging and it's rewarding at the same time. Every Sunday I would sit down at the Honeysuckle coffee shop in Carrboro with a ton of readings that would really challenge my prior convictions on a lot of current day topics, whether that be immigration or voting or property rights. Traversing many time periods, we cover a lot of different readings from philosophers like Rousseau and Mill, but also present-day researchers like Jonathan Anomaly, which is really cool. Within these courses, students are encouraged to ask themselves why they believe what they do, and to question if it is sound and rational based on the readings provided within the course, and then to provide strong arguments supporting their claims. Our instructors within the Gateway course created an environment where sitting in a class on a Monday morning was something that you could be really excited about. You never knew what kind of discussion or debate would be sparked that day, and it was always a place where you were encouraged to be bold and open with your thoughts and questions. To explain a little bit further about what the PPE minor offers, students are required to take 5 courses, 3 of which are in economics, political science, and philosophy course of their choice, and then the last 2 involve the Gateway course and the capstone seminar. Students are also provided various opportunities outside the classroom, such as active speaker series, weekend seminars, and then the semester-long reading groups, if some of you guys have heard of that. For example, in the reading groups, you meet with fellow students and a discussion leader at Gourmet Kingdom, and you share dinner, build new relationships, and discuss some complex topics regarding the reading of your choice. The PPE minor is an excellent avenue for students preparing for future education in fields like law and medicine and careers in the private and public sector. On the PPE website, alumni spotlights of some of the students showcase the variety of interests and aspirations that PPE graduates have for their future, such as policy reform or spearheading some community improvement programs. Ultimately, leaders emerge from the UNC PPE minor because they are given the tools to see the world through an intricate weaving of various disciplines. Students come out of the PPE program more well-rounded, analytical individuals, curious and eager to contribute comprehensive and unique viewpoints to the careers of their choice. The PPE minor is an excellent path for students, and I am grateful for this experience and the lessons that I have gained from it thus far. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. And our final speakers before we adjourn outside to enjoy some snacks and drinks and continue this discussion are going to be two representatives from the Undergraduate Philosophy Club, Nathan Harrison and Greer Underwood.
Hey everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Greer Underwood. I'm a senior here at UNC, double majoring in philosophy, American studies, and minoring in studio art.
And I'm Nathan. I'm a junior here, and I'm also a philosophy major as well as an economics major.
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to get up here and give a little introduction to the Philosophy Club. The two of us and Raj, who sadly couldn't be here today, he's did a couple interviews, run UNC's Philosophy Club, and we meet weekly on Wednesdays in Caldwell Hall, right upstairs next to the Parr Center, actually, from 7 to 8, in Caldwell 213, which is on like the second floor, as I just said, Caldwell Hall. And it's right across the hall as well.
So our meetings typically begin with a short presentation, introducing this topic, either by one of us or by a member of the club. And then the rest of the meeting is an open discussion with the team members, often centered around some discussion questions we prepared beforehand.
Yeah, and so this year we've only had, I think, 3 meetings so far, or maybe we're coming up on our 3rd. But the first few topics have been kind of like an introduction into the discipline, so what is philosophy? And then I led a talk on appearance and reality, so kind of like in a epistemological sense. And then Nathan recently led a talk on the problem of suffering. But we always encourage fiery and passionate disagreements and agreements from all our members. And we like to kind of give everyone a chance to meet on a topic of their choice so we all get more exposure.
All jokes aside, if you'd like to come join us for our weekly meetings, please do. Next week, one of our members will be presenting on Gramsci and cultural progening.
We always have free pizza too.
So, as I always say, come to the Philosophy Club with free food. The state of conflict with neighbors is good.
Thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you to all of you for being here with us today. And as I said, we'll be outside. If you'd like to ask any of our speakers questions, most of our contact information is available on the philosophy website. But if you ever have any questions about who you'd like to speak to more, please feel free to email me or talk to one of us outside. Thanks again for being here.